My name is Ken Doxey. I'm Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. And although I don't like podia, I'm going to stand behind this one because we're going to videotape this workshop for folks who couldn't be here to see later. And that's fair warning to you that your comments will be videotaped if you make them, and I hope you'll feel free to anyhow. So I'll stand back here even though I'm very far away from you, and then when we get to Q&A at least, I'm going to wander and roam amongst you a little bit more freely. I think I'm supposed to put a disclaimer up here, at least briefly. Mostly this is for the web presentation. We'll provide the slide deck on the Academic Affairs website. It'll be up within a few days or less probably, and the video will be up whenever Gretchen Drew, who's our videographer and communications person, Gretchen, thank you, is able to get it prepared for you. Also, I'm going to do introductions. Well, I've mentioned Gretchen. At the back table is Pam Palanek and Sonia Rundberg and Amber Garrison. And I think that Schottky. Okay. Amber Garrison was at the university several years ago and never worked for Academic Affairs. But my brain decided to come up with that last name. Sorry, Amber. They're the folks that make it possible for us to convene here, so thanks to all of you. I really like doing this workshop, and I really like my job because I get to work with faculty promotions. I do other things as well. I was talking with George from history about assessment of student learning, something we'll all have the opportunity to talk about over the next couple of years more aggressively than we have in the past. But faculty promotions and tenure, I get to read about the really terrific people. I'm a chemist. I know the chemists are good. I know I'm really good. And in my job in academic affairs, I get to find out really how awesome everybody else is on this campus. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to read promotion files. Promotion to full, I've got a growing bookshelf full of books that you folks have written that I had to have for myself, and I don't steal them from your supplementary file. You get your books back. And sometimes I'll talk about timescales, and maybe some people have been associate professor for a long time for various reasons, family, research timescales and things like that. But it's really fun to watch people who've been associate professors for a long time moving into the full professor ranks as well. So feel free to interrupt me with questions, and we will have time afterward. Rough overview of what I will run through today. And I'm going to start with technical details. The collective bargaining agreement discusses the promotion and tenure process in considerable detail. It discusses promotion to full professor in a fair bit less detail. There's a single section, although the section basically refers to the process for promotion to associate professor with tenure. So there's a fair bit of detail. There's still a little ambiguity and uncertainty, and I'm kind of looking forward to maybe have a little bit of a conversation about some of these things today. The one huge difference, of course, is that in the unlikely event of an unsuccessful promotion consideration for full professor, and I say that because statistically we don't say no very often because the people coming up for promotion are really good and fully deserve promotion. But if you are unsuccessful, it does not lead to saying of goodbye from the university. Of course, a tenure denial leads to a one-year terminal contract. A denial of promotion to full professor means you maybe not very happy, and you talk to your colleagues and you talk to your dean, and in the end you sort of internalize and increase your stress level or whatever, but you get to try again. My third bullet point, and maybe this is I think I might have another point where I was planning to discuss this, but I see it here, so I'll do it now. Tenure evaluation is a required contractual thing. If you had credit for prior service, you have opportunities to be considered earlier, but at somewhere 1 year it says your tenure decision has to be made by June 15th of that year. It's not something you get to decide about. And the CBA is very prescriptive. It says in the fall term of the year preceding the year in which a tenure decision is required, the department head will notify the candidate, request certain documents, and so on. The CBA doesn't discuss the decision or the timing for promotion to full professor. Largely it's left up to the candidate. And that's appropriate, But at the same time, it wouldn't be inappropriate for us as department heads or deans, as might be appropriate or relevant, to let our associate professors, colleagues, know that, you ought to think about undergoing review for promotion to full professor. Things are going really well. We don't want people, passive aggressive or whatever. We don't want people to say, well, I didn't know you thought I was ready, and for years to go by when someone was eminently promotable. So how does this decision occur? Department heads, associate deans, if there is an associate professor that you're aware of who appears to have an outstanding record and is ready for promotion, a conversation doesn't hurt. Associate professors, if you're feeling that it's time and nobody said anything to you, don't take it personally, but say something to somebody else. Have a discussion. If you're in a unit, in a department, talk to your department head, talk to your colleagues. If the department head says, no, I don't think you're ready, and you really think you are, as I was talking with Michael Dreiling and some others earlier, should that one person be the gatekeeper to your career? I hope it's someone whose opinion you value and respect, but on the other hand, it's just one person. And so I'm a little uncomfortable thinking that a promotion case would not go forward if a department head said, no, I don't think so, unless you agreed. So a broader discussion, and again, this is maybe, I don't know if anybody wants to chime in with some thoughts about this, but my feeling is that I'm uncomfortable with a single gatekeeper. If you're okay with that conclusion, fine. If you're not, a broader discussion with your colleagues, and if the sentiment amongst all of your colleagues is, things are going really well, but maybe not now. How about next year? You've got a couple articles in the pipeline. Once those come out, the case will be strong. Or your book is just under contract and it's almost done. It'll probably be done by the time the provost needs to make a decision. But how about wait till it's actually published, and then everybody will remember you for how easily you were promoted, rather than the person that, okay, it's time, but gosh, we kind of wish he'd waited. Anybody have any comment about that? It's probably more than I needed to say, but the decision to undergo review is a matter of a discussion for an associate professor going to full professor. And it's going to have to happen in a timely enough manner. I'll come to timelines in a few minutes, timely enough that a file can be put together and put through the process appropriately. You all have the opportunity. I like to use the word opportunity when there are things we have to do, because I think there are things that I really think it is an opportunity for us to be revisiting our tenure and promotion guidelines, for example, our shared governance policies. We're working on a lot of departmental and unit policies, talking about things, formalizing things that we've just kind of done before. And I really think this is a great chance for us to really think about what we've done, what we're doing, and whether we would do things differently. I'm going to come back to that theme several times today. Coming back to my slide, I'll read here. So the CBA describes the service contributions, and I'll describe that in more detail. The last bullet I added for the first time for this presentation is I think it's important, not all of our faculty are members of the bargaining unit. That said, the university's intention is for all our faculty to undergo the same nature of review for promotion and tenure and for promotion to full professor. So if this slide doesn't resonate directly with you because you say, I'm not a member of the bargaining unit, so why am I referring to the bargaining unit or to the CBA? The CBA describes policies and practices in considerable detail. And as we migrate the things formerly known as Oregon, how could I have forgotten this? Michael, help me. Oregon Administrative Rules, OERs, thank you. I can't believe I lost that for a moment there. The revision of those is going to ensure that all our faculty are treated the same way. Okay? Timetable. During the winter and spring term, and it's spring term now, I guess, is it okay for me to ask how many of you are associate professors looking at possibly undergoing promotion review starting, say, now and culminating a decision at the end of next year? There are some, okay. So we're not too late. but in some regards, I hope things have already started for you. If not, it's not too late. But typically in the winter or maybe the spring term, there'd be this decision that the file is going to go forward, in which case you're going to need to provide certain things to your department head so that the review can continue. I'll talk in more detail about what those things are. One of them will be assistance that you would provide in selecting external reviewers, because that is typically the most time-consuming step in the whole review, so we want to make sure that's underway appropriately. Following your preparation of materials and the solicitation of external reviews, which typically happens during the summer, in the fall, your department would get together. There is generally a personnel committee, though not always. Chemistry defines the personnel committee as all the faculty who are eligible to vote on a particular promotion. That committee would create a report and have a vote. The full voting faculty in the department would then vote as well, and that's a signed secret ballot. And who is eligible to vote? You've all had the opportunity again to think about all that as you've created your shared governance, internal governance policies. The department head would complete an independent report and recommendation during the fall term. That then goes to the dean's office, and those of you that are in units that don't have with departments, obviously this modifies appropriately. I'm using that word a lot. I'll try to change my vocabulary. The school level review, every one of our schools or colleges has a personnel committee, either called a Dean's Advisory Committee or a Faculty Personnel Committee. That's an elected group of faculty. They will write an independent report and vote. That report and vote then goes to the dean, who writes his or her own report and makes a recommendation. We'll meet with the candidate at that point to discuss his or her recommendation. The file then leaves the dean's office, comes to my office in academic affairs. I will review things. I become the ultimate bureaucrat, checking to make sure everything was done correctly. These dossiers are important things to our faculty who are undergoing review. They're legal documents. They live for a long time. The state records retention says 10 years after the promotion consideration. We keep that file. So I make sure everything's correct, then release it to the elected university level faculty personnel committee, which is 12 faculty, 6 from CAS and 1 from each of the other professional schools. They write a report and prepare a vote. Each of these votes, by the way, there's not an expectation of unanimity. I sometimes, maybe this isn't the best analogy to use, but I think about the target shooting and how you can read something from the pattern of holes in the target. If they're all straight through the bullseye, you learn something. If they average to a bullseye but they're scattered, you learn different things. The pattern of the vote could actually be very interesting. So the faculty personnel committee will vote for either a strong yes, a weak yes, or a no vote. And they then forward that vote to the provost. The provost makes the final decision. And that's the only time in this whole process the word decision appears. Everyone else is making a recommendation to the provost. Provost decision is announced May 1st. That's coming up pretty soon. If you have colleagues who are under review for tenure or for promotion to full professor, they'll be hearing pretty soon. So get ready to have a celebration. Expectations in some regards are pretty simple. And this, I believe, is wording from the CBA. We expect you to be doing great in your research or scholarship in general, in your teaching, and in your service. And the second part is we want from the record we're looking at, we always focus on this for the tenure case, but it's equally relevant for the promotion to full professor. We're looking for the evidence that we think you're going to be a productive, valued colleague, participating appropriately in service, doing well in teaching, continuing and even growing your national or international reputation and scholarship through the rest of your career. Promotion to full professor isn't the great now I buy my lounge chair and sit in the backyard. It's a milestone along the way of a continuing career of excellence and distinction. So I use the word trajectory a lot when I talk about tenure, but I'll use it here as well. Some of these comments I almost deleted, and I decided there's some value in them, so I left them in. This notion of activity versus accomplishment. It's possible to do things but not really accomplished very much. I won't take the time to tell you about my mining expedition this last weekend when I moved a whole lot of rock, but only got about 6 inches closer to the zone of crystals that I really wanted to find. I didn't accomplish very much, except getting tired. Accomplishment is what we're looking for, of course. Accomplishment in part is identified by the extent of review to which what you've achieved has been scrutinized. Peer review or juries or panel evaluations, whatever is relevant to your discipline, those are good things. If you have 18 papers and 17 of them were submitted and it's published and one was subjected to rigorous double-blind scrutiny, some people might be concerned about whether there was quality control in those other 17 pieces. Maybe there was. And so using your vita, using your personal statement to establish, that's one message I always try to give is don't let reviewers find ways to doubt the quality of what you've done. Okay? If you might anticipate questions or concerns from a reviewer who may or may not understand your particular field of endeavor all that well, or how publication or presentation or exhibition works, make sure you explain to them so that they don't have the opportunity to try to find something negative about a file that's unarguably positive. New discovery or creation. I wrote a textbook when I was an associate professor, and I like to say I don't think it hurt my chances for promotion to full professor in chemistry. But I also don't think it really helped very much. I'm not in a book publishing field in general. We publish peer-reviewed journal articles. And my book, although I think was almost completely intellectual, creative thought, people sometimes look at a textbook and say, well, what you're doing is taking other people's thoughts and putting them together. And so there's something of a tendency to diminish the value of a textbook. This is a good chance for me to talk about one of the other things I wanted to go off track just a little bit on. This opportunity we have as we're reevaluating our promotion and tenure criteria. It really is an opportunity. If what I just said about textbooks raised the hackles a little bit, you're presented with an opportunity now to create a document describing what a promotion review should look like. What does scholarly production look like in your discipline? And I'm kind of hoping we really use this as an opportunity to redefine things. I'm going to talk about the book later, and maybe I should hold off on that till then, but I'm going to take care of it now. Many of our disciplines, the book is the currency for tenure. Another book is the currency for a promotion to full professor. Some of us may be in disciplines where we are increasingly recognizing that publishers are difficult to find, and publishers who publish in a reasonable time scale are even more difficult to find. Are there any art historians here? I hear that art history is notoriously slow in completing a book. The publishing process, not the authors. Is this the time for us to think about how we describe our expectations in a primarily book-oriented field? I think we ought to have those conversations. I'm also not sure personally that I'd be comfortable if a discipline says, well, a book is the currency, but things are slow, so if a book is half done, that's time for promotion to full professor. I worry. I will talk more about the book and when we consider it done. But is there something else that could be defined? How do you illustrate a trajectory that suggests a long-term career of continued excellence and productivity in the absence of say, these single concrete events of a book being published? I think I'll stop there, but perhaps interesting conversations departmentally or more broadly. Peer evaluation I mentioned, national or international reputation. We are an AAU, very high research activity, Carnegie classification institution. So we do have some expectations. Are our expectations evolving? We're an institution that believes strongly in publicly engaged scholarship. How does that look in terms of our current promotion and tenure criteria. I'm not sure we do a terrific job of capturing what public engaged scholarship looks like. The benchmarks, we talk about research or scholarship or creative activity, teaching and service. We expect you to be doing at least as well as our expectations in each of those areas. And I put in red what are the highlights. Service, there's always been some question, what does it look like? What are expectations? Jim Bean, one of our many former provosts, I thought did a very nice job of describing the qualitative sense of service expectation. For an assistant professor being promoted to associate with tenure, you expect to see engagement, perhaps committee membership. Maybe you were invited to serve or elected to serve on an editorial board. For a promotion to full professor, we want to see continued engagement, expanded engagement perhaps, and there's this qualitative sense of difference as well. So maybe instead of only committee memberships, you chaired some committees. Instead of being invited to an editorial board, maybe you're an associate editor for a journal, and so on. So this sense of growth into service as well as scholarship. And the final statement, and here would be another interesting discussion, and I think in some sense Yvette's town hall last week maybe started the campus-wide conversation, contributions to equity inclusion. We expect the personal statement to address contributions to equity inclusion. What do we do with that in a promotion case? If a candidate, if one of you sends in a personal statement and you don't have an independent statement addressing equity and inclusion, would the institution say, would the provost say, we're not promoting you? That's going to be an interesting campus-wide conversation, I think. What in the end role does this expectation, this requirement, have in the evaluation? And I'm speaking, obviously, I hope anyhow, very honestly with you. These are things that we're going to need to develop. There's no question in our minds if the scholarship is deficient, we're not going to promote. If the teaching is deficient, we're not going to promote. If service isn't there, I've seen the provost turn down promotions to full professor for people with active scholarship, appropriate or better teaching, and inadequate commitment to service. Will we do that for the contribution, equity, and inclusion? I hope we never have to visit that in actuality, and I'll tell you, having read 54 promotion cases this year, people really got it. The statements of contribution, equity, inclusion are really inspiring. And I'm hoping, I'm working with Yvette to find ways, we'll need to ask permission from candidates, but to share some of the things people said, some of the things people are doing that really illustrates what a true institutional commitment looks like. Timing, I mentioned the first thing. If you in the end are not supported in your promotion to full professor, if the provost says no, there will be some healing to do, unarguably, but in the end, I hope you will, I hope none of you face having to heal because you'll be promoted. But if it were to happen, please don't lose faith. Remember the first time you submitted a proposal or a journal article or maybe a book to a publisher and you got a negative review back. It hurts. I still have a drawer with some of those in it, but I can't open it. It hurts when people tell you things. But at some point, if you believe in the process, you can go back. Once the hurt fades a little bit, you read. You get maybe not hypercritical of yourself, but try to approach an unbiased position, and you try to find the things that people had to say that were true. You know, you're right. I didn't run the right control for that experiment, or this, or whatever stage you have to get to, but to find the helpfulness in the review and then to move forward from that and become better as a result. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about this. Another interesting discussion, and I believe our current interim president has an opinion about this, so I won't quote him. The standard has been to say that an early promotion has higher expectations than simply having reached the level of promotability. Standard timeline, by the way, for a pre-tenure person, there's a 6-year period. You're reviewed starting at the end of your 5th year and through the 6th year, and the decision's made at the end of the 6th year. That's nominally the standard time scale for promotion to full professor as well, but I said standard instead of normal, and I put quotes around it because people stay associate professor for varying lengths of time. It's not uncommon for people to stay associate longer. I've forgotten, but I was more than 6 years as an associate professor before I was promoted. It just didn't feel like the right time to me. I was waiting to have a body of scholarship that I thought made the convincing case, and my department agreed, and then we went forward. So 6, 7, 8 years, 9 years. I do keep a list of associate professors who have been at rank for 10 years or longer, because I'm interested in those that have been at rank for what starts to be a longer period of time, and wonder, and we have discussions about whether there are things that departments could do, that the institution could do to help people find the path to promotion to full professor. There could be powerful reasons. Your scholarship took you abroad for 3 years to South Africa or something. It's maybe this is the time your kids were at a pivotal stage and you needed to focus more time on your family. Whatever the reasons might be, there can be very good reasons. My list of long-term associates has a lot of people whose names I know really well, and I don't know everybody at the university. I know them well because they're doing lots of other things that are of great value. They're department heads or serving on major committees, doing community outreach sorts of things. I know them for what they do, and it's clear from the extent of what they do that that has to have an impact on a traditional trajectory of scholarship toward promotion. What if you've been an associate professor for 3 years and things are going great, another book came out or 5 journal articles and you just won a Nobel Prize, whatever might have happened? I think I'm ready. The department thinks you're ready. An early promotion, we still call it early because the standard time frame is this 6-year period. There's a general, again, this is a qualitative sense that an early promotion is more than just having integrated expectations that, okay, now I've hit it. The linguistics department expects 2 journal papers a year for a 6-year period, so 12, and I hit 12 after 4 years, so it's time. It might well be, and maybe this discussion isn't all that important because it's oftentimes obvious when someone is ready to be promoted. If they've merely reached the bar, but they've reached it 3 years earlier than most people do, they probably don't look like they're just trickling over. It looks like they're doing great, and it might just be time to promote them. So we shouldn't, I don't think, be overly stuck on the 6-year clock. And I think we probably ought to have a broader campus conversation about what early promotion looks like. And if 6 years is a standard, do you have to win the Nobel Prize to get considered early? Or could it be a distinguished record that clearly passes muster? I think that's probably where we want to head. Credit for prior service would only be appropriate to worry about if some of you were hired here as associate professors with credit for prior service. Does that fit any of you? Okay. In case there's somebody watching the video later and trying to unravel all the sidetracks that I've taken here, I'll say that if you did have credit for prior service, then let's say you had 4 years of credit, 2 years here would add up to the 6-year period. That would be considered a normal time frame for promotion. If you didn't use some of that credit, it would still be okay. And if you came up earlier than 2 years, that would technically be considered an early promotion consideration. Only want to talk about a few of these things. Maybe the most important thing I want to talk about is that we do work from the belief that scholarship counts once. So if you published a book that led to your being awarded tenure, that book isn't considered as a piece of scholarship that gets you promoted to full professor. We already used that piece of currency for one promotion. So if you're in a book publishing field, maybe the next book is required for the promotion to full. Articles as well. Mostly that's everybody understands that. There are some departments that feel that a promotion to full professor should look at the full arc of the career And I understand that and I appreciate that, but at the same time, the primary focus for the evaluation for promotion to full professor really is meant to be what's happened since promotion to associate professor. Since it's not always a 5 or 6 year period, it's pretty regularly a longer period, reviewers and review committees can have difficulty figuring out what part of, let's say it's a 10-year period that's being reviewed. Should we look at that whole 10 years? Yes. Trajectory becomes important here again. If with a 10-year period, you've got a pretty long period of time. If you require 8 articles as a typical support for promotion to full professor, and 7 came out in the first year after tenure, and the last one came out last month, what does that trajectory look like? Does that lead you to believe there's a promising career of regular influential publication or not? That's a conversation you need to have. But so this final 6-year period within the longer window since promotion can be a particularly important thing to look at in terms of ascertaining a trajectory for the future. And I've already talked about longer term associates. So for those of you that are looking at promotion review starting basically now and ending at June 15th of 2016, or May 1st, 2016, sorry, you need to provide a waiver or non-waiver letter. I've got a little more information about that. You'll provide your signed and dated CV. That can be updated at any time through the process. We ask, to the extent you can, that you update rather than send a new CV. You're all looking at full professor promotion. You've got long CVs. If the status of one publication on page 5 changes and you send a new 30-page CV, your folder gets thick pretty quickly, and the reviewers have a hard time figuring, I call it where's Waldo sometimes. They're trying to figure out what's the difference between these two documents. So make it easy for them. Just send an update saying, hey, the manuscript 17 on page 5 is now accepted as opposed to submitted. Same for your statement. And then at this time as well, as I mentioned earlier, you'll want to provide suggestions regarding external reviewers. And I think I have further hints about that coming up. You'll also provide, in time for things to go out to external review, your supplementary materials. Most importantly, your scholarship portfolio, which will contain your publications, photographs of installations, program books, whatever comes in your field of endeavor to document your scholarly activity during the review period. You're welcome, and in fact you're advised, if you have projects in the works, something that's been submitted but not less accepted, to some extent things that are almost ready to be submitted. You don't want to go crazy with this, but we're looking for trajectory. And so make sure your statement and your portfolios illustrate for reviewers where you're going in the future as well. Again, promotion is not the end, it's just the beginning of the new phase of your career, so we're looking beyond that. Teaching portfolio is illustrative materials about your teaching. It's not every syllabus for every class you taught and every exam and all that. It's examples of things that you're particularly proud of that you want to illustrate about your teaching. And the same for service. So the waiver, you have options. These are options that are entirely up to the candidate to decide. The file can be entirely closed. You'll sign a letter that says, I believe that the reviews of faculty for promotion to full professor should be confidential, so I'll waive my right to see the evaluative materials in the file. There's a limit to what you could actually waive. So if you're one of the rare cases where the decision is negative, having signed this waiver, you still have opportunities to see things, okay? It primarily relates to the identities of the external reviewers, though there are other pieces as well. That's one option, is you say, I'm not going to look at it. I don't want to. You can tell the reviewers their letters are confidential and I will not learn who they are. The bottom extreme is you can say, I'm sorry, I want to have access to the materials in my file. And the reviewers that are notified of that, and if they write a different letter because they think you might see it, that's what happens. It's your choice. You can make that choice. And you can have intermediate choices. For example, one of the most common, I'd say, is that people will waive the right to see the letters submitted by external reviewers, but retain access to see internal documents. I could quote you numbers, and I will. I'd say most of the cases are fully closed. A few a year typically will be a partial waiver, and maybe a few a year will be maintaining the full openness. There's a little bit of a disciplinary culture to this, and it's what it is. If you're a department head or dean, you don't get to urge your candidate to choose one option or the other. It's entirely the candidate's choice. What do reviewers think when they see these? You know, I can go off official record and give my opinion. I think reviewers of letters pay attention to the waiver status, and if a letter was written under an open waiver, namely a retention of access, people wonder whether the letter writer was fully honest or not. But that's not always the case. It's individual. I tell people when I write letters for them that it doesn't matter to me what their waiver status is. I wouldn't say anything in the letter that I wouldn't be happy to share with them, and trying to either show them how much I think of them or to help support them if I thought there were issues. But not everybody works that way. So some reviewers treat letters in open files with a little bit of hesitation. Others say it's what it is. We provide candidates free access to make that choice. These letters were written by people who knew that choice was made. I'm going to take the letter at face value. Here's what it says. That's how I'll interpret it. Okay, I said most of this already. The timing is this waiver letter needs to be signed before the department or dean request external reviews. I've blessedly seen only one of these in 8 years of working on promotions and tenure here in hundreds of cases. But if letters are solicited and people write them thinking that they are confidential and then it turns out they're not, you have to write to the letter writers and explain. You don't have to say you screwed up, but you have to tell them that actually the candidate is going to have access to your letter, and give them the choice of withdrawing their letter because they don't write letters to open files, or amending their letter if they would say something differently, knowing the candidate might see it, or if they would say what I would have said, which is it's fine. I'm okay with it either way. But you have to write back and make that choice. It takes time. It maybe is embarrassing because you fumbled it a little bit. So make sure you've signed a waiver in advance. People running promotion cases, make sure your candidate has signed a letter before you request external reviews. The reviewers are notified of the waiver status. Yavita, you've been in business for a while. I probably don't have to tell you about how to write a CV. Someone had to tell me, as a chemist, I always focused on my scholarship and all my presentations and trips and things like that, but I didn't have a teaching or service section of my CV really until I started in administration. And then I realized, that is an essential part of what I do. I'd better add that to my CV. And I was happy for the first time in my career that we did annual activity reports so I could just draw from those and remember what I had done. Your education, more and more people doing this. I wish everyone would. If you include the date of graduation, it's not so we can figure out how old you are, but it's so we can figure out who was at your institution when you were there, and your mentor's name. I operate from several deep down principles. One is I don't really like being embarrassed. And if I send a request to review a promotion case to a doctoral mentor for the candidate, and the person writes back and says, I think the world of Professor X, but she was my student, is it appropriate for me to write a letter? The answer is no, it's not appropriate, and I'm an idiot for not knowing that you were her doctoral mentor. So if you help us not look dumb by telling us who you worked with, that would be great. I'm not going to talk a lot more about the CV, but remember the importance of peer evaluation or juried installation. Again, the relevant context for your work. Make sure that reviewers can figure out those pieces that were that went through that type of review as opposed to those that were simply submit and accept. It's not that those submit and accepts are bad things, but they are evaluated somewhat differently than a fully peer-reviewed contribution. Okay, did I give you time to read that? Sorry. One of my favorite speakers taught me that the audience can read faster than I can, and sometimes there's nothing more to say. I talked about work in progress. Be careful, and I don't need to tell you this, but I will. Just be open and honest about how you categorize something that's in progress. If you put down as submitted something it's almost done, and by the time the dean sees this, it's going to be submitted. So I'm going to say it was submitted, and then you get sick or break a leg or something happens or you get the wrong research result, then it doesn't support your hypothesis anymore. Then it's not submitted, and saying it was is people could read that the wrong way. So just have an honest appraisal of where things are. The book. Here's where I was going to talk in more detail, but I think I already covered that broader context. The university believes a book is a book when it's done, and if you're in a field where a book is what you're going to use to illustrate that it's time to be promoted, then we would like the book to be done. What does it mean for it to be done? Ideally, it's the book. You can provide a copy of it in your supplementary material that I will read and want to keep, and I'll buy a copy and send you yours back. At least it should be done in terms of the writing is completed. There is no more writing that you'll be doing. You may be doing galley proofs, maybe there's indexing or something, but the manuscript is completed in final form, and it's got a publisher, so a signed contract. Without either of those things, if you've got what you think is a completed manuscript, but there's no contract that you don't have a publisher yet, well, it's probably not really completed because your publisher's always going to have something they want you to do, right? Or if you have a signed contract, a publisher said, this is awesome, we can't wait to publish your work, but it's not quite done. Well, it's almost done. It's just that the introduction and the second to last chapter are half done. I need to finish those. I'm a very trusting person. It just got really dark. Okay, it's not just me. Okay. But what if you never write the introduction or finish that second to last chapter? Okay. So when I say it's done when it's done, it's sort of meant to be self-referential, but also sort of obvious. If it's not to that point, there's no absolute guarantee that something might happen that would stop it from ever being completed. Okay. Promotion of full professor, in a sense, you've got an easier choice here, really. You're coming up for a required tenure decision, and you're going to present what you got. Promotion to full, if it is not in the clear, this thing is done. Nobody's saying you have to get promoted or reviewed for promotion to full professor this year. So ideally, as just a personal sense, I would like to believe that I won't see promotion to full professor files with books that we're having to decide whether they're completed or not. Because if it's so close, you finally got the signed contract, and it was just before the provost made a decision, okay, we can have updates up until the provost decision, but maybe it would have been easier and less stressful for you and everybody else just to wait till next year. So that's part of the discussion about timing as well, as you consider whether it's time to come up. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, or as I talked about, think about what published scholarship looks like if you're in one of these disciplines where a book is the standard coin of the realm. And think about whether there are ways you can cast your expectations for promotion in a way that would pass approval of the dean and of the provost, but that wouldn't lock you into something that's so black and white. How do you, I already talked about that. Okay, so think about ways we could do that. I grade out most of these things about what else to put in your CV, and I think I'm not even going to talk about the others. Although, dating the presentation and letting us know where it was at least is helpful. If you have a long list of presentations and people are trying to decide which were the ones, some people code their CV, they'll put a line and say everything above this line happened since I was promoted to associate professor. That makes it easy. Your statement, you've all written a statement because you're all associate professors. Doesn't need to be lengthy. It's not unusual for them to be longer than 5 to 6 pages. We don't send it back. It's not writing 121. It's an interesting thing to write. I've given workshops on occasion on writing the personal statement. It's a real balancing act. Your statement's going to go to the professional reviewers. You want to show them how awesome you are, and they know your field. That's why they were chosen to be reviewers. Same time, everybody at the university beyond your department is not going to be a specialist in your field, and so you're trying to explain to them what you do. So there's this balance between generalist and professional readership. I always use the example of a theoretical mathematician a number of years ago who wrote a page and a half, just general context of here's what theoretical abstract algebra looks like, and here's what motivates us and keeps us awake at night and is fun for us. And then there was a little break, and it said, if you're not a mathematician, you might want to stop reading now. And launched in, and there were symbols and shapes and things that were understandable to a mathematician. And I'm a chemist. I do the same thing in chemistry, right? The FPC was really impressed with this statement because, and so was I, because they read that first part, and although they know they didn't, they felt like they understood what this person did. They read it as a statement in part of ability to teach. This person took something that is unintelligible to us, as my research would be to you, and made us feel we understood it. So it was just a particularly nice statement. And you want to cover what you've done, what you're doing, and because we're talking trajectory, what you're planning to do. And again, in red to highlight this, it's not a new change now. We're in year 2, and this will continue. And cover your contributions to equity and inclusion. And perhaps I'll be working with Yvette, and we'll create some sort of document that could provide examples of things people have said or done. But as I said before, this year was really a remarkable experience in seeing the range of things people have done, the ways they found to tie their research, teaching, and or service into this concept of institutional mission with regards to equity and inclusion. I always hesitate on this one, but I talked about how reviewers will sometimes naturally be looking for the warts. One thing that's common is they'll look at if you're in a publication field, they'll look, say, well, you had 2 papers in 2010, 1 in 2011, and then there was nothing for the next 2 years, and then 3 papers came out. So they're looking for gaps and unusual things, because we can't handle anything outside the ordinary. And so we can handle steady trajectories, but if there's dips and things, we get curious, we maybe get suspicious. So consider explaining things in your statement that a reviewer might try to hang his or her hat on to make a negative. And I think I already talked about this too. But if there's a gap in your publication record, it might be that your research is cyclical. You published a book, and now there's going to be 4 years of in the field data gathering, interviews before anything else can possibly come out. We're not going to publish something every year. Maybe you got sick. Maybe you were clinically depressed and took medical leave, and maybe it's nobody's business but your own that happened. So this is a personal choice, but I just recommend thinking about whether there's something fuddy in say your scholarship record. Maybe there was a year of really bad teaching evaluations, whatever it might be. Think about whether it's something you want to try to help people understand. Co-author contributions. Increasingly, we are in multidisciplinary fields. Collaboration, co-authorship is common. I always put my students, the primary student researcher's name first, and I put my name last, because I don't need to be first author on a paper. Other fields, first authorship is obviously the critically sought thing. Still others, they list alphabetically. As a doxy, I usually would turn out okay in that front, but if you're a Zizix, you're in trouble. So don't let anybody misread the author order on co-authored publications. Explain how that authorship order arose. Sometimes people want to know, and I've seen DACs request information if it was a co-authored book. Can you tell us relative contributions? In the extreme, you might have a note from your co-author, or your department head might ask for a note from the co-author, but simplest is just to explain that we were equal partners in this book, or I wrote chapters 1 through 5 in the introduction, and then my co-author wrote the other, whatever it might be, just laying it out there so nobody is confused. External reviewers, I find myself saying a lot of words when I'm up in front of you here. I hope not too many. When I write documents, I do the same thing. Years ago, I was teaching a new class, and I herniated 2 discs in my lower back and was laid up for 6 weeks. And the only position I was comfortable with was on the stomach propped up on my elbows, which is a perfect position for putting a laptop in front of you. And so I created lectures for my students and heavy pain pills and my laptop in bed that were ferried in and issued, and they were documents that said what I would have said in person. So they were really long and had lots of stories, like you're getting today. There's a long document with good stories available through the Academic Affairs website that talks about selecting external reviewers. I'm going to highlight just a couple things. One is that as a candidate, you get to suggest people. As a person putting together the evaluation file, you select the reviewers. And I actually, in my first year, I would send a dossier back to a dean if it said that the candidate had selected reviewers, or at least I'd send them a note and say, the candidate doesn't select them, the candidate suggests them. I sort of gave up on that, but at least want to highlight that this is true. You get to suggest people as a candidate, and your department head or your unit head or dean ought to take seriously your suggestions, and I urge people to be used from your list whenever possible. The fact that you suggested somebody, we asked about whether open file changes the read. If you suggested a reviewer, there will be some people who think that they're not going to take that reviewer as seriously because you suggested them. Never mind that you picked somebody you've never met, you don't know, but you just know that they're the best person in your field. Somebody might be suspicious. So we don't want too many people that were suggested by you. The good news is that if you suggest people at a list to your department head, and your department has independently come up with a list of reviewers they think would be appropriate, if they came up with the name of someone that you suggested, it's not tainted by being marked as suggested by the candidate. Okay, the department gets to take credit for those. So my recommendation to candidates, and my recommendations in general about this, come from 11 years with the National Science Foundation as a program director, where I farmed thousands of proposals out for anonymous peer review. Suggest people that your department probably won't think of. If you suggest ones that they do think of, it's okay because, again, they won't be tainted. But if the expert in your field is someone that your department head's never going to figure out, that's a perfect person to recommend. And if they're not at an AAU institution, that's okay. The best people at our fields aren't working at these 62 institutions that happen to be called AAU. We like to see a majority of reviewers from peer institutions to ourselves. If you're a sculptor, Caltech's probably not a peer institution. Maybe your peer institution's a place I never heard of. That's okay. We want the right reviewers to review your case. And you can read all that and more in the document. The department, for those who are putting the file together, most of the teaching part of the review file is prepared by the department. The list of courses taught, the summary table, the comparison data, all that comes from the registrar's office, by the way. You just request it. Maybe this is a time to note, when you request it, you get a digital file, right? Looking to see if anybody's seen this. They don't send you a package of printouts. You get a digital file. And then you print it out, and then somewhere along the line, somebody scans it back into a digital file because we like having digital files. Starting next year, starting with files being put together for next year, we will have a digital document available for you. So when you get those teaching evaluations, you'll just open this digital document, go to the right place, and it say insert this file here, and then it will exist. Okay. So we've had a rollout to office managers already this year about the digital file, but for candidates it'll be largely invisible. But you'll be happy to know that the institution you've chosen to work at has finally figured out that creating a document on a computer, printing it out, and then scanning it so you could have a digital file is probably not the right way to do things anymore. List of teaching awards, that's probably in your CV, and you might want to provide that, but if the department knows, great. So all this stuff is what comes in from the department. Peer evaluations, at least one every other year since you got tenured. That's been a requirement for a long time now. We still don't see very many files that actually meet this requirement. A person who is ready to be promoted to full professor shouldn't be punished because the department forgot to get peer evaluations. So we work with this, but ideally more and more unit heads are recognizing the expectation that peer evaluations be done. What you'll need to provide as a candidate is a list of the students you've supervised, ideally segmented. Here are doctoral students, and you can maybe have a coding for whether you were a mentor or a member of a committee or a chair of a committee, master's students separately, undergraduate honors students separately. And the teaching portfolio, I already mentioned that. It's illustrative of the things you would like to show people about what you do in the realm of teaching. The service portfolio we already mentioned as well. Here's a little more information about it. I was promoted before we were expected to have a service portfolio, but I have a drawer in my desk where I put things that I get when I do things that people thank me for. If I served on a committee, if I gave a presentation to the Rotary Club, City Club, whatever I might have done, people send you thank you notes. I put them in my feel good about myself drawer, and if I were preparing a service portfolio, that would be a really pretty good draft of what a service portfolio would look like. I put here, it could have been elsewhere, but the collective bargaining agreement has more information about the service portfolio. I think there is a document through academic affairs as well, talks about the service portfolio, and you're welcome to try to look that up or contact me if you can't figure out where that is. Final phase here, just talking about some of the things that will happen. I've already hit some of these during the review of a file that might be worth keeping in mind so that we can try to keep them from happening. We talked about early versus standard time frame cases already. You want to make a good impression. I came here with service or credit for prior service as a pre-tenured faculty member. At the time that I could have earliest come up for my tenure review, that was good. There's no question that I would be offered tenure, in part because they had just hired me away from somewhere else and spent some money to get me, and I didn't really think it was a good model to do that and then fire people a year later. But I didn't feel like I had a compelling case. It was fine, but it wasn't awesome. And I wanted the dean to remember me. So I waited a year, and more publications came out, and a $500,000 grant got funded, and the dean remembered me for being awesome. So you don't want to just get there. I think you want to make it easy. We say outside offers don't drive early decisions. That doesn't mean that an outside offer wouldn't be taken seriously. You're an associate professor, Harvard offers you a tenured full professor position. Well, what we can't do is say, well, Harvard offered you a tenure, or promotion to full professor, so sure, we'll make you full professor. But what we can do in a retention case like that, even if it's early, is we can say we would love to put you through evaluation for promotion to full professor. Okay. I'm thinking of another conversation I would love to have, but it's not the right context for it. Okay. So we don't accept somebody else's review of you to make a decision here. We have processes. Our president is undergoing, our new president is undergoing a review for tenure as we speak. That's what we do. Okay. Parental leave or leave without pay, the clock stopped for 1 year. I only had 6 months off. I don't want to delay the clock for a year. I want to delay it for 6 months. We only have a single process, and it's on a 1 year time scale. So it delays for a year. offer of a delayed tenure clock is simply a notification basically from the candidate. You had a child, you say, I would like a year of parental credit. What that does is give you the option of waiting an additional year before, it's less of an issue for promotion to full professor. Maybe I should drop this from here. For tenure, it gives you an option of an extra year that you don't have to take. So this is a relevant part for promotion to full. If you were offered an extra year and then you say, everything went fine, I wasn't delayed whatsoever, I want to be on the standard time clock, well, then is somebody going to think, well, now it's early because you had an extra year and you're coming up a year before. It doesn't count as an early case. So although you can be granted leave or a stoppage of the clock, you're not obligated to take it once it comes time for evaluation. The word in red maybe is the key. I've talked about most of these other issues already, I think. We're looking at the period since you were last promoted, however long that period might be, and we're looking at what the trajectory looks like throughout that period with perhaps a special focus on the previous 6 years. Department heads or associate deans or whoever might be preparing these files, things that could be done to help things run smoothly. Well, this bullet point 1, we're engaged in this now, that we're looking at our departmental criteria, trying to be as clear and explicit as possible, making sure our faculty have copies of those documents. They certainly should because they'll be involved in crafting them through this process. Annual reviews. Annual serious reviews where we actually tell people how things look so that they don't have a sequence of 5 annual reviews all saying looking good and then they get a very critical review regarding promotion to full professor and they say, well, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell them? It's why do we have a hard time being honest? It's because we're human, I think. It's hard to tell people things that we feel are critical, but it's important that we do so there are no surprises. Peer evaluations. Again, I can't imagine us punishing a candidate for the delinquency, that's a strong word, the failure to do effective or regular peer reviews for their candidates. But departments, unit heads, make sure that the files have the right complement of peer reviews. If it's really not time, there's one of these difficult conversations, but have an appropriately engaging conversation about the timing of the promotion review and decide if it's time or if perhaps it would be best to wait. Pick the right reviewers. In the file, make sure we know they're the right reviewers. You write a brief biographical sketch, just a brief one. In that, make sure we know they're at Poughkeepsie State. Well, what's up with that? We don't even recognize the school. How can that be a valid peer reviewer? Emeritus at Poughkeepsie State, they took retirement after a distinguished career at Harvard. Okay, maybe that's different. Okay, so make sure we understand why the reviewers were the right ones. And the rest of this, I think you're already reading ahead. We're making important recommendations regarding one of our colleagues' life and career, and we have to be appropriately professional as we do so. Okay. I think that's it, except for questions then. And I'm gonna